Most people think being forgotten is the ultimate pain, but they are wrong. The true agony is when they suddenly remember you exist only because they smell money. My parents erased me from their lives for 5 years without a single call. Then my aunt posted my yacht online. My father texted immediately. He did not ask if I was okay. He simply demanded I sell the boat because the family needed cash. My name is Harper Chapman. For the last 1,825 days, I have been a ghost to the people who share my DNA. To my parents, I was not just estranged, I was erased. I was the mistake they scrubbed from the family narrative. The daughter they stopped mentioning at church potlucks because my career choices did not align with their narrow definition of success. 5 years, 60 months without a birthday card, 260 weeks without a single text message asking if I was alive, if I was safe, or if I had food in my refrigerator. They forgot I existed until this morning. The silence did not break with a heartfelt apology or a tearful reunion. It broke because of a Facebook algorithm and a geolocation tag. My Aunt Martha, the only person from that side of the family who still treated me like a human being, had come to visit me in Miami. Martha is a sweet woman, but she possesses the digital literacy of a golden retriever. She had taken a video of my new acquisition, a 70-foot azimuth yacht docked at the private marina, and posted it to her timeline. She thought she was just being a proud aunt. She captioned it, "So proud of Harper and her beautiful new boat," and tagged the exact location. She might as well have fired a flare gun into a pool of sharks. Within 14 minutes of that post going live, my phone began to vibrate across my mahogany desk. It buzzed with the relentless, aggressive rhythm of a jackhammer. I glanced down. The names on the screen were ghosts from a past life. Dad, Mom, Brandon. I picked up the phone, not to answer, but to read the preview of the text message my father had sent. It was typed in all capital letters, urgent and demanding. It did not say, "Harper, we miss you." It did not say, "Harper, are you okay?" It read, "Sell the boat. Family in crisis. Call me now. We need the money." I stared at the screen, and the only thing I felt was a cold, clinical detachment. I was currently standing in my corner office at the Blackwell Restructure Group. 30 floors above the city, I was wearing a tailored blazer that cost more than my father's car, and I was in the middle of a high-stakes negotiation. "Ms. Chapman?" The voice on my headset crackled. It was the CFO of a failing logistics company. He sounded desperate. "If we agree to the asset liquidation, can we keep the subsidiary in Ohio?" I turned away from my personal phone and looked out at the skyline. My voice was smooth, calm, and utterly unforgiving. "No," I said. "The subsidiary is the only part of your portfolio that is bleeding cash. You cut the limb to save the body. Gary, that is the deal. You have until 5 o'clock this afternoon to sign the papers, or Blackwell pulls the financing and you file for Chapter 11 by morning. Do not test me on this." I tapped the button to end the call before he could beg. My hand did not shake. My heart rate did not spike. I am a debt restructuring expert. My job is to walk into burning buildings, assess the damage, and decide what is worth saving and what needs to be bulldozed. I deal with desperate people every single day. I know the smell of panic. I know the sound of a liar trying to buy time. And right now, my personal phone smelled exactly like my work phone. The office door opened, and Aunt Martha stood there, her face pale. She was clutching her phone like it was a grenade. "Harper," she stammered, "I think I did something bad. Your mother just called me. She was screaming. She wanted to know how much the yacht cost. She said you owe them." Martha looked like she was about to cry. "I deleted the post. Honey, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to start a war." I walked over and poured her a glass of sparkling water from the office bar. "It is fine. Martha," I said, my voice steady. "You didn't start a war. You just revealed the enemy's position." My phone buzzed again. Another text from my brother. "Brandon, we are at the gate. Let us in or we are calling the cops and saying you stole that money." I almost laughed. It was such a clumsy, amateurish threat. Brandon had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But he had the business acumen of a toddler. The intercom on my desk chirped. It was the Marina security. Patched through to my office line. "Ms. Chapman," the head of security said, his voice tense. "I have a situation at the North Gate. There is a group of 4 people here, an older couple, a young man, and a young woman. They are making a scene. The older gentleman is screaming that he is your father and that he has a right to inspect his property. He is trying to push past the guards." I could hear the commotion in the background. I could hear my father's booming voice, the same voice that used to lecture me about how I was a disappointment, how I would never amount to anything without his guidance. "Ms. Chapman?" the guard asked. "Do you want me to call the local police? We can have them removed for trespassing. They are disturbing the other owners." My finger hovered over the speaker button. The logical choice was to say yes, send them away, file a restraining order, keep my life clean and sterile, just the way I had built it over the last 5 years. But then I looked at the security feed on my second monitor. I zoomed in on their faces. My father, red-faced with entitlement. My mother, looking around the marina with hungry eyes, assessing the wealth of my neighbors. Brandon, looking disheveled and frantic, and a woman I didn't recognize, my brother's wife, presumably, who was already holding her phone up, recording the yachts, probably planning her next social media post. They looked like vultures circling a carcass. They thought I was the carcass. They thought I was still the 22-year-old girl who cried when they cut me off. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They didn't know that for the last 5 years. I had been swimming with sharks that would eat my father for breakfast and use his bones as toothpicks. If I sent them away, they would just keep coming back. They would harass me from a distance. They would play the victim. No, in my line of work, you do not ignore a toxic asset. You acquire it, you audit it, and then you liquidate it. "No police," I said into the intercom. The words tasted like cold steel. "Let them in," Aunt Martha gasped behind me. "Harper, no, you don't have to do this." "Escort them to the yacht," I continued, ignoring Martha's plea. "Tell them I will be there in 20 minutes. Offer them champagne. Make them feel comfortable." "Understood, Ms. Chapman," the guard said, though he sounded confused. I cut the connection and walked over to the coat rack. I swapped my comfortable office cardigan for a sharp, black structural blazer. I checked my reflection in the mirror. My makeup was flawless. My expression was impenetrable. "Why?" Martha asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you let them in after what they did to you?" I turned to her and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile I wore when I was about to hostilely take over a company that had underestimated me. "Because, Aunt Martha," I said, picking up my clutch, "they think they are coming to a family reunion. They think they are here to collect a check." I opened the door to my office, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. "They don't realize," I said, stepping into the hallway, "that they are walking into a restructuring meeting, and I am the chairman of the board." I stood on the aft deck of the Obsidian, my 70-foot azimuth, and watched the security monitor on my tablet. I had arrived 20 minutes before them, just enough time to transform the space from a leisure craft into a negotiation room. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer, smoothing out a microscopic wrinkle. It was a habit I had picked up in the boardroom. Presentation is defense. My watch, a vintage Patek Philippe that cost more than my father's entire retirement fund, felt heavy and cold against my wrist. It was a reminder that my time was now the most expensive thing on this dock. The gate opened. They walked down the pier in a cluster, looking less like a family and more like a group of tourists who had taken a wrong turn. My father led the way. His stride was still pompous, that chest-out march of a man who believes he is the moral center of the universe, even though his suit jacket was pulling tight across the buttons and the fabric looked shiny with age. My mother walked a half step behind him, her head swiveling left and right. She was not looking for me. She was scanning the other yachts, checking the names, calculating the net worth of my neighbors. She smoothed her hair nervously, a reflex I remembered from every time a creditor used to call our house phone. Trailing behind them was Brandon, my brother, the golden boy. He looked heavier than I remembered, his face puffy, his eyes darting around with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. And clinging to his arm was a woman I assumed was his wife. She was dressed in pink, carrying a handbag that screamed counterfeit designer. And she was already holding her phone up, filming the hull of my boat for her social media feed. They stopped at the gangway. They did not look up to see me standing on the upper deck. They looked at the teak wood. They looked at the chrome railings. They looked at the massive radar arch. "Look at that finish," I heard my father say, his voice carrying over the water. "That is Italian. Must be—" "It is huge," the woman in pink squealed. "Brandon, get a picture of me in front of the nameplate." I decided it was time. I walked down the spiral staircase to the main deck, my heels making a deliberate, rhythmic clack against the steps. I stopped at the top of the gangway, crossing my arms. "Hello, Father?" I said. The four of them froze. My father looked up, blinking as if he had forgotten I was part of the equation. For a split second, I saw the shock on his face, not the joy of seeing a long-lost daughter, but the shock of seeing the plain, quiet girl they had discarded now standing above them, looking down. "Harper," my mother breathed out. She stepped forward, her hands fluttering up toward her chest. "Oh, look at you. You look expensive." It was a telling choice of words. Not healthy, not happy, expensive. The woman in pink, my sister-in-law, stepped out from behind Brandon. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing as she assessed my blazer, my shoes, my watch. There was no warmth in her gaze, only a sharp, predatory calculation. "So," she said, popping a piece of gum loudly, "Brandon didn't say you were loaded. Did you marry a CEO or something? Is he inside?" The air on the dock seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brandon winced and nudged her, but she just shrugged. Keeping her phone pointed at me, I did not answer her. I did not get angry. I simply looked at her. I held the silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. It is a trick I use with junior executives who speak out of turn. You let the silence stretch until it becomes physically uncomfortable, until they start to fidget and question their own existence. She lowered her phone, her smile faltering. "What?" she muttered. "Shoes," I said calmly. "Excuse me?" My father bristled, his face reddening. "Harper, we are your family. We have not seen you in 5 years. And the first thing you say is about footwear?" "This is a hand-laid teak deck," I said, my voice flat and non-negotiable. "Stilettos and hard-soled shoes damage the wood. If you want to come aboard, the shoes stay on the dock. If you don't want to come aboard, the exit is behind you." I held my father's gaze. I saw him wrestle with his ego. He wanted to storm off. He wanted to lecture me about respect. But then he looked at the yacht again. He looked at the luxury he was desperate to access. Greed won. It always does. He bent down and untied his laces, one by one. They piled their shoes in a plastic bin by the gangway. It was a small victory, but a necessary one. It stripped them of their dignity before they even crossed the threshold. I led them into the main salon. I had instructed the crew to stay below deck. I wanted no witnesses for this. The salon was bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon. The cream-colored leather sofas looking inviting and pristine. My mother ran her hand along the back of a chair, her eyes wide. "Please, sit," I said, gesturing to the seating area. I remained standing near the wet bar, keeping the physical high ground. "Harper," my father started, settling into the leather and spreading his arms as if he were holding court. "I have prayed for this day, every night for 5 years. Your mother and I have prayed that you were safe. We were so worried when you drifted away." "Drifted away?" I repeated. "Is that what we are calling it? I seem to remember you changing the locks and telling me I was dead to you because I refused to co-sign Brandon's first business loan." Brandon flinched. "That was a misunderstanding. Harper, We were all stressed. We are not here to dwell on the past, my mother interrupted quickly, flashing a bright, brittle smile. We are here because we are a family, and families help each other. God brings us back together when the time is right. And when the need is great, my father added, his voice dropping to a somber, serious tone. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. Harper, we didn't just come here to catch up. We are in a crisis. A genuine crisis. I figured, I said, pouring myself a glass of water without offering them any. You texted me about selling the boat before you even said hello. How much? My directness seemed to throw them off script. They exchanged glances. The sister-in-law nudged Brandon again. It is not just about money, Brandon said, his voice cracking slightly. It is an investment opportunity that went wrong. I was defrauded. If I don't cover the margin call, they are going to come after everything. Mom and Dad's house, the cars, everything. How much? I asked again. $248,000. My father said. The number hung in the air. It was precise, too precise. If it were a round $250,000, I might have believed it was a general debt. But $248,000? That sounded like a payoff. That sounded like a specific invoice with interest calculated down to the day. And when do you need it? I asked. Tonight, the sister-in-law blurted out. Or tomorrow morning at the latest, before the banks open. I looked at her. Her desperation was leaking out of her pores. Why tomorrow morning? Because that is when the auditors come, Brandon stammered. I studied them. My father's sweating forehead, my mother's trembling hands, Brandon's inability to make eye contact. This wasn't an investment gone wrong. This was something else, something messier. The urgency, the specific amount, the threat of losing the house. It all pointed to high-risk leverage or a legal settlement being kept quiet. That is a lot of money, I said slowly. I don't keep that kind of cash under my mattress. You have this boat, my father exclaimed, gesturing around the room. You have this opulence. Surely you can make a call. You can help your brother. He is your flesh and blood. I can make a call, I agreed. But I need to understand what I am buying into. I don't write checks for blind items. You don't trust us? My mother asked, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. After all we have sacrificed for you? I almost laughed, but I held it back. I am a businesswoman, mother. Trust is for children. Verification is for adults. I checked my watch. It is almost 7 o'clock. I have a chef coming to prepare dinner on the upper deck. Why don't you stay? We can eat, and you can explain exactly how this investment works. If the numbers make sense, we can discuss a solution. Relief washed over them. They thought they had won. They thought the dinner invitation was a prelude to a signature. They didn't realize that in my world, you buy dinner for the target right before you acquire their assets. That would be lovely, my mother said, relaxing into the sofa. I need to use the restroom, I said. Make yourselves comfortable. Don't touch anything. I walked down the corridor to the master stateroom and locked the heavy door behind me. I went into the ensuite bathroom and turned on the faucet so the running water would mask my voice. I pulled out my secure phone and dialed a number I had not used in 6 months. It rang once. Chapman, a gruff voice answered. It was Elias, a private investigator who used to work for the IRS before he realized there was more money in corporate espionage. I have 4 subjects on my boat, I said, keeping my voice low and rapid. My parents, my brother, and his wife, they are asking for $248,000 by tomorrow morning. They claim it is a business debt. You want me to verify? Elias asked. I want you to tear them apart, I said. I want to know who they owe. I want to know why the number is so specific. I want to know whose name is on the deed to my parents' house. And I want to know what my sister-in-law has been posting on social media for the last 48 hours. That is a deep dive for one night. Elias grunted. I pay you double for speed, I said. I need the truth before the sun comes up. I need ammunition. Elias, all of it. You will have it, he said. I hung up the phone and looked at myself in the mirror. My expression hadn't changed. I turned off the faucet. It was time to go serve dinner. The private chef I had hired for the evening, a man named Henri, who usually catered for embassy dinners, placed a plate of seared scallops with truffle foam in front of my father. My father looked at the delicate arrangement as if it were an insult to his appetite. He was a meat and potatoes man, the kind who equated portion size with value. "Shall we pray?" my father announced. It was not a question. It was a command. He bowed his head, clasping his hands together on the edge of the mahogany table. My mother immediately followed suit, squeezing her eyes shut with a piety that felt practiced. Brandon and his wife, whose name I had learned was Tiffany, lowered their heads but kept their eyes open, darting glances at the wine bottle Henri was uncorking. "Lord," my father began, his voice booming in the enclosed dining space of the upper deck, "we thank you for this food, though it is fancy and strange. We thank you for bringing our wayward daughter back into the fold. We pray that you soften her heart. Lord, we pray that you remind her that wealth is a test and that hoarding blessings is a sin. Remind her, Lord, that the family is the only true investment and that turning her back on her own flesh and blood in their time of need is an abomination in your sight. Amen." "Amen," my mother whispered, wiping a dry eye. I picked up my fork. "That was subtle, Dad," I said, slicing through a scallop. "You almost forgot to mention the part where I write a check." "It is not about the check, Harper," my mother said quickly, her voice trembling with that familiar mix of martyrdom and manipulation. "It is about duty. It is about proving that you haven't let this money change who you are." "I haven't changed," I said, taking a sip of the vintage Cabernet. "I have just learned how to read a balance sheet. Speaking of which, Brandon, tell me about this investment. $248,000 is a very specific number for a market fluctuation." Brandon straightened up, adjusting his tie. He looked like a child trying to wear his father's suit. "It was a sure thing. Harper, a decentralized finance protocol, high-yield arbitrage leveraging, AI-driven predictive modeling." He rattled off the buzzwords as if he had memorized them from a YouTube thumbnail. I set my glass down. "Arbitrage," I repeated. "So, you were exploiting price differences between markets for a risk-free profit?" "Exactly," Brandon said, looking relieved that I seemed to understand. "Risk-free. That is what the guy said. But then the liquidity pool dried up and the smart contract executed a margin call because of the volatility in the underlying asset class." I stared at him. "Brandon, if it was arbitrage, there is no exposure to volatility because the trade is instantaneous, and smart contracts in a liquidity pool do not issue margin calls unless you are trading on leverage with collateral you do not own. Did you pledge collateral?" Brandon blinked. His mouth opened and closed. "Well, it is complicated. The algorithm it shifted. It is a new kind of blockchain tech. Who is the counterparty?" I asked. "Which exchange holds the debt?" "It is a private firm," he stammered. "Global Tech Ventures." "That sounds like a shell company," I said coldly. "You didn't invest in a protocol. Brandon, you gave money to a Ponzi scheme, or you borrowed from a loan shark who gave himself a fancy LLC name. Which is it?" "Stop interrogating him." Tiffany slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Who cares about the technical stuff? He lost the money. It happens. Rich people lose money all the time. Look at you. You probably lose this much in a day." She gestured wildly around the yacht. "You have all this boat, the staff, and we are driving a 5-year-old sedan that smells like wet dog. It is embarrassing. Do you know what it is like to park that thing at the country club while everyone else is in a Mercedes?" I looked at her. "I thought this was about saving Brandon from bankruptcy. Now it is about your parking spot?" "It is about image," Tiffany snapped. "We need to upgrade. If we are going to fix this mess, we need to look like we have money. We need a new car, and we should have access to this yacht. I have 5,000 followers on Instagram. If I tag this location, I could get brand deals. I could help pay off the debt if you just let us use the assets." Use the assets, I repeated slowly. You want to charter my yacht for your influencer career? Family discount, she said with a smirk, reaching for the wine bottle herself. Free, obviously. My mother reached out and touched my hand. Her skin was cold. Harper, listen to them. They are struggling. You have been blessed with so much. God gave you this success so you could lift us up. If you don't help, it proves that you have lost your soul. It proves you don't care about us. I care about the truth, I said. And the truth is, Brandon's story has more holes than a fishing net. You want me to clear a $250,000 debt without seeing a single piece of paper? Why do you need paper when you have your father's word? My father bellowed. His face was flushing a deep, dangerous red. He had been quiet during the technical questions, likely because he didn't understand them. But now that the conversation had shifted back to authority, he was in his element. Because my father's word doesn't hold up in court, I replied calmly. You insolent girl, he spat. He pointed a thick finger at me across the centerpiece. You think because you made some money in the city that you are the head of this table? You are nothing. You are a child, a woman. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Henri, the chef, stopped moving in the kitchenette. Excuse me? I asked softly. You heard me, my father said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a growl. It is unnatural. A woman shouldn't be hoarding wealth like a dragon while the men of the family scrape by. Assets should be in the hands of the man of the family. It is the natural order. You should be transferring this boat, and your accounts, to me and Brandon to manage. We would know how to grow it properly. We would ensure the family legacy is secure. There it was, the naked, ugly truth. It wasn't just about the debt. They didn't just want a bailout. They wanted a coup. My father couldn't stand the fact that the daughter he had discarded was now the financial titan he had always pretended to be. He didn't want my help. He wanted my submission. He wanted to strip me of my power and redistribute it to the rightful owners, the men. I felt a cold rage crystallize in my chest, sharp and hard as a diamond, but I did not let it show on my face. In a negotiation, when your opponent reveals their ultimate weakness, their ego, you do not attack, you retreat, you feign vulnerability, you let them think they have landed a blow. I lowered my eyes. I let my shoulders slump slightly. I picked up my napkin and dabbed at my mouth, hiding the tightness of my jaw. Is that really how you feel? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That I am not capable? We are just saying you need guidance, my mother said, her voice softening now that she sensed victory. It is too much burden for a girl alone. Your father just wants to protect you from the stress. I see, I said. I took a slow breath, letting it shudder on the way out. Maybe you are right. I have been so lonely these past 5 years. I just wanted to build something you would be proud of. But maybe I just built a wall. Exactly, Brandon said, leaning back in his chair, a smug grin spreading across his face. We can tear down that wall. Harper, together. Just sign off on the debt tonight, and tomorrow we can sit down and restructure everything. Put Dad on the accounts. Make me a partner. I need to think, I said. Standing up, I made sure my movements were slow, hesitant. I need a moment to process this. It is a lot to ask. Take your time, my father said magnanimously. Picking up his fork again, he looked at the scallops with new interest. The food is getting cold. We will be right here. I will be in my office, I said. Please, enjoy the wine. I walked out of the dining room, keeping my head down until I turned the corner into the corridor. The moment I was out of their sight, I straightened my spine. The hesitation vanished. The vulnerability evaporated. I walked into my office and locked the door silently. I moved to the desk and pulled up the surveillance feed from the dining room on my main monitor. They were not solemn. They were not praying. They were laughing. Tiffany was pouring more wine, spilling some on the tablecloth. Brandon was high-fiving my father. My mother was already looking at the silverware, turning a fork over to check the hallmark. probably wondering if it could be pawned. "She is breaking," I heard Brandon say through the high-fidelity microphones I had installed. "Did you see her face? She is desperate for us to like her again." "She will sign," my father said, chewing loudly. "She has always been weak. She needs to be led." I watched them for a long moment. They looked like hyenas feasting on a carcass they hadn't even killed. I picked up my phone and opened the encrypted messaging app. I typed a message to Elias. New instructions. "It is not just a debt. It is a hostile takeover attempt. They are aiming for power of attorney or asset transfer. Dig into Brandon's global tech ventures and find out if my father has any gambling debts or liens I don't know about. I want the full dossier." Nuclear option. I hit send. On the screen, my father raised a glass to the room. "To the Chapman Empire," he toasted. I leaned back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. "To the audit," I whispered. The blue light of my monitor was the only illumination in the room. At 2:14 in the morning, the email from Elias finally hit my inbox. The subject line was stark. Project Red Ink. Urgent. I opened the attachment. It was not a summary. It was an autopsy of my brother's financial life. Elias had been thorough. The first page dismantled the lie Brandon had told at dinner. There was no decentralized finance protocol. There was no algorithm. There was no arbitrage. The investment opportunity was a fabrication, a clumsy cover story for a much older, much uglier vice. Brandon had been gambling, not at casinos, where there are limits and regulations, but on offshore sports betting sites and high-risk speculative option trading. He had been bleeding money for 18 months. But that was not the crisis. The crisis was how he had tried to plug the hole. I scrolled to the section labeled Liability Structure. The debt of $248,000 was not owed to a bank. It was owed to a private lending firm called Apex Capital Solutions, an outfit based in a strip mall in New Jersey that specialized in distressed assets and high-interest bridge loans, the kind of place you go to when the banks have already laughed you out of the building. The loan was a balloon payment structure, high interest, short term, with a strict default clause triggering immediate seizure of collateral. I frowned. A lender like Apex does not give $250,000 to an unemployed man with a credit score in the low 500s without significant security. Brandon owned nothing. His car was leased. His apartment was rented. I turned the page to the collateral agreement. My blood ran cold. The address listed as collateral was not Brandon's apartment. It was 1402 Maplewood Drive, my parents' house, the house I grew up in, the house my father claimed was his castle, his legacy, the one asset he had paid off after 30 years of factory work. I zoomed in on the signature block at the bottom of the deed of trust. There, in black ink, were 3 signatures: Brandon Chapman, Thomas Chapman, Deborah Chapman. I stared at the signatures for a long time. My father's signature is distinct, a sharp, angular scrawl that he executes with aggressive speed. My mother's is round, loopy, almost childish. The signatures on the screen looked right at first glance. But I am a professional. I look for the cracks in the foundation. I opened a second window and pulled up old birthday cards and tax documents I had saved from years ago. I placed them side by side with the loan document. The Thomas Chapman on the loan document had a hesitation mark at the top of the T. The ink was slightly heavier at the start of the C, as if the hand holding the pen had paused to check its position. It lacked the fluid velocity of a genuine signature. It was a drawing of a signature. I looked at my mother's name. The loop on the D was too perfect, too consistent. Brandon hadn't just borrowed money. He had committed felony fraud. He had forged our parents' signatures to mortgage their home out from under them. They were sitting in my guest cabins right now, sleeping off the wine, completely unaware that their golden boy had already sold the roof over their heads to a shark in New Jersey. If he defaulted, and he was going to default today, Apex Capital would not just sue Brandon. They would foreclose on my parents. They would be on the street in 30 days. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. This changed the battlefield entirely. This was not a request for help. This was a hostage situation. I kept scrolling. The file on Tiffany was next. If Brandon was a desperate fool, Tiffany was a calculating predator. Elias had pulled her digital footprint, including deleted messages from a cloud backup she likely didn't know existed. While Brandon was frantically trying to find money to stop the foreclosure, Tiffany had been busy elsewhere. I read a transcript of a text thread from 3 days ago between her and a contact listed as Steve. Legal. Tiffany: if the funds hit the joint account, how fast can we move them to the separate holding LLC? Steve: 24 hours, but if it is a gift or inheritance, it is cleaner. Tiffany: his sister is good for it. She has deep pockets. Once the wire clears, I want to file for separation immediately. I am not going down with this ship. Steve: just make sure the money is not designated for the debt directly. Have it sent as a personal transfer. I felt a dry, humorless laugh build in my throat. She was playing him. Brandon was trying to con me to save himself, and his wife was planning to con him the moment the cash hit the account. She was going to let him go to prison for fraud while she walked away with half of my money. It was almost impressive. It was a nesting doll of betrayal. I did not feel sad. I did not feel the sting of familial disappointment. Those nerves had been severed 5 years ago. What I felt was the clarity of a surgeon holding a scalpel. I had the diagnosis. Now I needed to cut. I picked up my secure phone. It was nearly 3 a.m, but my attorney, Silas, was on a retainer that cost more than most people earned in a decade. He answered on the second ring. "Harper," Silas said, his voice crisp and awake. "You are calling late. Is the marina on fire?" "Not yet," I said. "I need you to execute a purchase agreement. Immediately. Name the target. Apex Capital Solutions. They hold a distress note on a property at 1402 Maplewood Drive. The borrower is Brandon Chapman. Co-signers are Thomas and Deborah Chapman." "You want to pay off the note?" Silas asked. "No," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I do not want to pay it off. I do not want to discharge the debt. I want to buy the debt. I want to become the holder of the note." Silas paused. He understood immediately. "You want to step into the shoes of the lender. You want the rights to the collateral." "Exactly," I said. "I want the full assignment of the mortgage. I want the promissory note endorsed to me. I want the power to foreclose. And I want it done before the markets open at 9 o'clock. Apex will be happy to sell," Silas reasoned. "If the loan is toxic and due today, they will take 80 cents on the dollar to avoid the legal hassle of foreclosure. I can have the electronic documents signed by their night desk within the hour. But Harper, if you buy this note, you are effectively holding the axe over your parents' neck." "I know," I said. "Prepare the assignment agreement, and prepare a second document, a confession of judgment." "For whom?" "For Brandon," I said. "If he wants me to fix this, he is going to sign a confession admitting to the forgery and the fraud. I want it notarized. I want it ironclad. If he ever tries to contest the debt, I want that confession to autofile with the district attorney." "That is aggressive," Silas said. "That is the nuclear option. They came to my house to rob me." "Silas," I said, staring at the frozen image of my family on the monitor. "They just didn't use guns. They used guilt. Prepare the papers. Send a mobile notary to the marina at 7 o'clock. "It will be done," Silas said. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the window. The marina was quiet. The water was black and still, reflecting the few lights of the harbor. My parents were sleeping in Egyptian cotton sheets, dreaming of the check I would write them in the morning. They thought tomorrow was going to be a celebration. They thought they had successfully guilt-tripped the wayward daughter back into the fold. They had no idea that when the sun rose, they wouldn't be having breakfast with their daughter. They would be having a meeting with their new creditor. I watched the first hint of gray light touch the horizon. "Welcome to the restructuring," I whispered to the glass, at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. I pressed the button on the wall-mounted control panel that governed the yacht's integrated sound system. I did not choose a gentle acoustic melody to rouse them. I chose Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. and I set the volume to a level usually reserved for nightclub inspections. The sound erupted through the speakers in the guest cabins below deck. It was a brass-heavy, thundering assault designed to shatter sleep and replace it with immediate adrenaline. I stood on the aft deck, sipping a double espresso, watching the sun burn the mist off the water. I was already dressed in a fresh white suit. My hair pulled back in a severe, tight bun. I heard the thumping of feet on the stairs. My brother, Brandon, stumbled out first, wearing nothing but boxer shorts and a look of sheer panic. His wife, Tiffany, followed, wrapping a silk robe around herself, her eyes swollen and confused. My parents appeared a moment later, my father clutching his chest as if the music were a physical blow. "What is happening?" My mother shrieked over the crescendo of the horns. "Is there an emergency?" I tapped the tablet on the table, and the music cut out instantly. The silence that followed was heavy and ringing. "Good morning," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet like a razor. "Breakfast is served." I gestured to the table. It was set with military precision. Fresh fruit, pastries, coffee, and juice were arranged in the center. But at each place setting, there was no silverware. Instead, there was a thick stack of legal documents bound with heavy clips. Standing beside the table was not the chef, but a tall, gray-haired man in a dark suit. "This is Mr. Vance," I said, introducing the mobile notary I had flown in from the city. "He is here to witness signatures. Please, sit down." "Harper, what is this?" my father asked, his voice groggy but tinged with irritation. "You nearly gave me a heart attack. Can we not just have coffee?" "We don't have time for coffee," I said, remaining standing. "You told me last night that the deadline is this morning. You said the auditors, or whoever you are afraid of, are coming today. If you want my help, we move on my timeline, and my timeline starts now." They exchanged glances. The mention of the deadline snapped them awake faster than the caffeine would have. The fear returned to Brandon's eyes. He pulled out a chair and sat down, his hands shaking as he reached for a glass of water. "So you are going to do it?" Tiffany asked, her voice dropping to a hungry whisper. "You are going to pay the debt?" "I am going to fix the problem," I corrected. "But we are going to do it properly. I run a financial firm. Tiffany, I don't hand out duffel bags of cash. Everything is documented. Everything is legal. Everything is above board." I walked to the head of the table. "I have spent the last few hours restructuring the family portfolio to make this work. I am not going to lend Brandon the money. He has no income, no assets, and no credit worthiness. Lending to him is throwing money into a furnace." Brandon flinched, but he didn't argue. He knew it was true. "Instead," I continued, "I am going to purchase an asset. I am offering to buy the house at 1402 Maplewood Drive from Mom and Dad." My father sat up straighter. "Sell the house? But that is our home. That is my legacy. It is a house," I said flatly, "and right now, it is the only thing of value you have to leverage. But because I am your daughter, I am not going to pay market value. The market value is maybe $900,000 on a good day." I paused for effect. I watched their eyes. "I am offering to buy it for $1,500,000, I said. The number hung in the air. I saw the calculation happen in real time. My father's mouth opened slightly. My mother gasped. Greed is a powerful anesthetic. It numbs the warning bells in the brain. They weren't thinking about why I would overpay by 60%. They were thinking about the profit. They were thinking about the bragging rights. $1.5 million? My father repeated, his voice losing its edge. "Well, that is a very generous valuation. It reflects the emotional value of the property. Certainly. It is a bailout packaged as a sale," I said. "The proceeds will be used to clear Brandon's debt immediately. The remainder will be yours to keep. You can continue to live there as tenants with a lifetime lease for $1 a year. Nothing changes in your day-to-day life. You just cash out the equity." "Oh, Harper," my mother said, tears welling up in her eyes, tears of relief, tears of avarice. I knew you still loved us. I knew you would come through. There is one condition, I said. I pointed to the smaller stack of papers in front of Brandon. Since I am stepping in to save Brandon from immediate ruin and saving you all from the humiliation of his failure, the balance of the family estate must be preserved. If I buy the house, the money goes to save him now. That means he gets his inheritance today. He does not get it later. I looked at my brother. The document in front of you is a full waiver of inheritance and a quitclaim on any future family assets. You sign this, and I wire the funds to cover your debt. You walk away clean, but you walk away with nothing else. The house, the savings, the future, it all stays with me to ensure Mom and Dad are cared for. Brandon stared at the paper. He looked at Tiffany. Tiffany was biting her lip. I could see the gears turning in her head. She did not care about Brandon's future inheritance. She cared about the $248,000 needed to keep him out of jail today, and she cared about the surplus cash my parents would ostensibly have from the sale. She figured she could charm the excess money out of the old couple later. "Sign it, Brandon," Tiffany hissed. "We don't have a choice. The guys are coming at noon." "But everything?" Brandon asked weakly. "You are getting $250,000 to clean up your mess," I said cold. "Take the deal. Brandon, it is the only one on the table." My father reached for a pen. He didn't even read the sales contract. He was too focused on the $1.5 million figure. He signed his name with a flourish, his ego swelling with the idea that his house was worth a fortune. My mother followed suit, signing quickly, smiling at me as if we were sharing a secret. They had no idea that I already owned the debt on the house. They had no idea that by selling me the house, they were legally merging the title with the mortgage I held, giving me absolute, uncontested control to deduct everything. They were handing me the keys to their own execution. Brandon picked up the pen. He hesitated for a second, his hand hovering over the waiver. "Do it," my father commanded. "Your sister is being generous. Don't be ungrateful." Brandon signed. "Mr." Vance stepped forward silently, stamping each document with his seal, verifying the identities. Locking the trap tight, he collected the papers and placed them in a leather folder. "Thank you." "Mr." Vance said softly. "The transaction is recorded." "When does the money hit?" Tiffany asked sharply. "We need to make a transfer by 10 o'clock. I am initiating the wire now," I said, pulling out my phone. "It is an internal transfer since I bank with the same institution as the settlement account. It will clear in 30 minutes. I saw Tiffany lean over to Brandon. She thought I was distracted by my phone. She lowered her voice, but she didn't know the acoustics of the aft deck, and she certainly didn't know I was listening with every fiber of my being. "Don't worry about the waiver," she whispered into Brandon's ear. "Once the money is in our account and the debt is paid, we will find a lawyer. We will say you signed under duress. We will say she coerced you. We will get it all back. Just let the check clear first." I didn't blink. I didn't look up. I just tapped the screen of my phone, sending a final confirmation message to Silas. "Documents secured. Execute phase 2. I looked up at them. My face was a mask of calm, polished marble. "Good," I said, sliding my phone into my pocket. "That is enough." "Enough what?" my mother asked, reaching for a pastry now that the tension had broken. "Enough lies," I said to myself, though they didn't hear me. "Enough for us to move forward," I said aloud. "Mr. Vance, please prepare the disbursement schedule. I believe we have some deductions to discuss." "Deductions?" my father asked, a piece of melon halfway to his mouth. "What deductions?" I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who has just watched the gate of the sheep pen latch shut. "Standard business practice. Father," I said, "let's look at the numbers." Mr. Vance, the notary, closed his leather portfolio with a soft, final snap that echoed in the sudden silence of the aft deck. My family sat around the table, their eyes fixed on their phones, waiting for the vibration that would signal the arrival of $1.5 million into their joint account. They looked like hungry dogs, waiting for a butcher to drop a bone. "The wire has been initiated," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. I tapped the tablet in front of me, and the large 60-inch screen mounted on the bulkhead flickered to life. It displayed a spreadsheet, crisp and stark against a white background. "However, before the net funds are released, we must review the settlement statement. As per the contract you just signed, all outstanding liabilities attached to the property and the beneficiaries must be cleared prior to disbursement." "Settlement statement?" my father asked, his brow furrowing. He had a piece of croissant stuck to his lip. "What are you talking about?" "Harper, you bought the house. You send the money. That is the deal. Don't complicate it with your corporate jargon." "I am not complicating it," I replied, standing up and walking over to the screen. "I am executing it. And since we are discussing the sale of the house at 1402 Maplewood Drive, we must address the liens attached to that title." "There are no liens," my father barked, slamming his hand on the table. "I paid that mortgage off in 1998. I have the letter from the bank framed in the study. That house is free and clear." "It was free and clear," I corrected him, "until 18 months ago." I swiped the screen. The spreadsheet vanished, replaced by a scanned image of a deed of trust. It was the document Elias had found, the one with the forged signatures. "What is that?" My mother squinted at the screen. "That is a second mortgage," I said, "taken out against the equity of your home. The principal amount is $248,000. The borrower is listed as Brandon Chapman. The co-signers are Thomas and Deborah Chapman." The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the room. My father turned his head slowly, mechanically, to look at his son. Brandon had gone pale. His skin was the color of old ash. He sank lower in his chair, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. "Brandon?" my father whispered. It was a sound of pure disbelief. "What did you do?" "I fixed it," Brandon stammered, his voice cracking. "Harper is fixing it. That is what the money is for. Dad, to pay this off. It is fine." "I am not paying it off," I interjected sharply. I pressed another button on my tablet. The screen changed again. This time, it wasn't a document. It was a live video feed. The face on the screen was familiar to Brandon. It was a man sitting in a dimly lit office with wood paneling and a trophy marlin on the wall. He was wearing a gold chain over a black turtleneck. It was the loan officer from Apex Capital Solutions. Brandon made a sound like a strangled cat. He scrambled backward, his chair screeching against the teak deck. "No! Why is he here? You said you would handle it." The man on the screen looked up and nodded. "Ms. Chapman, the wire has been received. The transaction is complete." "Thank you. Mr. Russo," I said to the screen, "please confirm for the record what has been purchased." Apex Capital has assigned the promissory note and the deed of trust for the property at 1402 Maplewood Drive to the Blackwell Restructure Group, effective immediately. "Mr. Russo recited in a bored monotone, "We have transferred all rights of collection and foreclosure to the new note holder. We are out of it. Pleasure doing business with you." The screen went black. I turned back to my family. They looked as if I had just detonated a bomb in the center of the fruit platter. "You," Tiffany breathed, her eyes darting between me and her husband. "You didn't pay the debt." "Correct," I said, leaning against the bulkhead and crossing my arms. "I bought the debt. I did not give Apex Capital $248,000 to set Brandon free. I gave them the money to buy the right to own you." I looked directly at my brother. "You don't owe the Sharks in New Jersey anymore. Brandon, you owe me. I am your creditor now. And unlike them, I know exactly where you live. I know exactly what you are worth, which is nothing." "But you are my sister," Brandon whimpered. He tried to smile, a sickly, trembling expression that made him look pathetic. "You wouldn't foreclose on us. You wouldn't hurt your own family. You are just teaching me a lesson, right? This is just a scare tactic." I walked back to the table and picked up the fresh stack of documents Mr. Vance had notarized: the waiver of inheritance, the sale agreement for the house. "This is not a lesson," I said, my voice dropping to a register that was calm, professional, and utterly terrifying. "This is a liquidation. You forged Mom and Dad's signatures. Brandon, that is a felony. In most states, that gets you 5 to 10 years in prison. The only reason the police are not walking up that gangway right now is because I hold the note. I own the evidence of your crime." My mother let out a sob, clutching her napkin to her mouth. "My house," she wailed. "Thomas, she owns the house. She owns the debt. We could lose everything." "Harper." My father stood up, his face purple with rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You tricked us. You let us sign those papers thinking we were getting a windfall. This is entrapment. It is fraud." "It is a binding contract," I replied, unflinching. "You signed a sale agreement for $1.5 million, but you forgot to ask about the deductions. You see, when you sell a property, you have to pay off the existing mortgages first. So, I am deducting the $248,000 plus interest that Brandon stole." "That still leaves over $1 million, Tiffany screamed, standing up and slamming her hands on the table. "You said $1.5 million. Give us the rest. We will sue you. I will get the best lawyer in Miami, and we will sue you for every penny you have." I looked at her with genuine pity. She was so out of her depth she didn't even realize she was drowning. "You can't sue me, Tiffany," I said softly. "Look at page 14. Paragraph 3 of the document you just encouraged your husband to sign." I picked up the document and read aloud, my voice clear and precise. "The undersigned parties agree that any disputes arising from this transaction shall be settled by binding arbitration in a jurisdiction chosen by the purchaser. Furthermore, the sellers acknowledge that any existing debts owed to the purchaser by any member of the seller's immediate family shall be deducted from the final sale proceeds at a rate of 100% plus a punitive risk premium." I dropped the paper back onto the table. "You didn't read it," I said. "You were too busy counting money that wasn't yours." "You monster," my father hissed. "You ungrateful, cold-hearted monster. We raised you, we fed you, and you treat us like employees." "No, father," I said. "Employees get paid. You are liabilities, and I am balancing the books." I signaled to Mr. Vance. He handed me a final sheet of paper. It was the disbursement schedule, the check I was actually going to write them. "Now," I said, holding the paper up, "let's talk about the final number. After deducting the stolen mortgage, the accrued interest, the legal fees for the acquisition of the note, the cost of the emergency restructuring, and the risk premium for the fraudulent nature of the collateral, the net proceeds from the sale of your home are not $1.5 million. I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. The sound of the waves lapping against the hull was the only thing audible in the heavy, humid air. "In fact," I said, "after I deduct the personal loan I'm now forced to issue to cover the gap in the home's actual value versus the inflated price I offered, the number is quite different." I placed the paper in the center of the table. They all leaned in. They stared at the figure at the bottom line. It wasn't a check for $1 million. It wasn't even a check for 100,000. My father looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "This," he whispered. "This has to be a joke." "I don't tell jokes," I said. "I close deals." The piece of paper sitting in the center of the breakfast table was not a check. It was a detailed, line-itemized settlement statement, the kind used in complex corporate mergers. My father stared at the bottom line, his face draining of color until it looked like old parchment. "Zero," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and rising fury. "It says 0. Actually," I corrected, leaning over to tap a specific line with my manicured fingernail, "it is -$412. Technically, you owe me for the wire transfer fee, but I am willing to waive that as a gesture of goodwill." "This is impossible," Tiffany shrieked, snatching the paper from the table. Her eyes scanned the document frantically, looking for the mistake, for the missing millions. "You said the house was worth $1.5 million? Where's the money?" "Let's walk through the math," I said, my tone as cool and detached as if I were explaining a quarterly loss to a board of directors. I pointed to the first section. Line 1. Purchase price, $1,500,000, a generous valuation. As we agreed, I moved my finger down. Line 2. Payoff of existing lien to Apex Capital Solutions. That is $248,000 in principal, plus $12,000 in accrued interest and late fees. That comes off the top. "So you're saying there's still more than $1 million left?" Brandon yelled, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "Line 3, I continued, ignoring him. "Legal fees for emergency acquisition of distress note. My lawyers do not work for free. Brandon, neither do the investigators I had to hire at 2 a.m. to uncover your fraud. That is $45,000. $45,000? My mother gasped. "For a few phone calls?" "For saving your son from a federal indictment," I replied sharply. Line 4. Risk premium for title insurance on fraudulent conveyance. Since the previous deed was forged, the title company, which is a subsidiary of my firm, requires a 300% risk premium to insure the transfer. That is $750,000. "That is robbery," my father roared, slamming his fist onto the teak table. "You are charging us insurance on our own house?" "I am charging you for the fact that your son committed a felony on the paperwork," I said. "If I try to sell this house later and the fraud is discovered, I am liable. I am pricing in that risk. You signed the agreement accepting all standard and non-standard closing costs. It is right there in paragraph 12. I didn't stop. Line 5. Prepayment of lifetime lease. You wanted to stay in the house, didn't you? A lifetime lease for 2 people in that neighborhood, calculated actuarially for another 20 years, is valued at $450,000. I have deducted that up front to secure your tenancy. You are charging us rent to live in our own house? My mother wept, her tears flowing freely now. Harper, how could you? I am securing your housing, I said. If I didn't deduct it now, you would have to pay me monthly, and given Brandon's track record with money, I don't trust you to make rent. This way, you are safe. You have a roof over your heads. You just don't have the cash. I pointed to the final sum. Total deductions, $1,500,000 and $412. Net proceeds to seller, 0. The silence that followed was absolute. The wind whipped across the deck, fluttering the edges of the settlement statement. You tricked us, Brandon stammered. He looked like he was going to be sick. You let us think we were going to be rich. I let you think what you wanted to think, I said. I told you I was fixing the problem. The problem was the debt. The debt is gone. The problem was the potential foreclosure. The house is safe. The problem was your lack of liquidity. I have removed the asset you were using to dig yourself into a hole. You are debt-free. Brandon, you should be thanking me. It is not fair, Brandon screamed. The sound was raw, a childish wail from a grown man. It is not fair. You have everything. You have this boat. You have the money. You have the power. You could have just written the check. Why do you have to ruin us? Fair? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. You want to talk about fair? Fair is not calling your daughter for 5 years. Fair is missing every birthday, every holiday, every promotion. Fair is erasing me from your life until you needed a bank. I took a step closer to him. Is it fair that you stole Mom and Dad's house? Is it fair that you forged their names? Is it fair that you came here, to my home, to lie to my face and try to hustle me for $250,000? You are right, Brandon. This isn't fair. This is business. And in business, you pay for your mistakes. This is not business, my father bellowed. Standing up to confront me, he tried to summon the old authority, the terrifying presence that used to make me cower as a child. This is family. We are your blood. The Bible says, "Do not quote the Bible to me." I cut him off, my voice snapping like a whip. The Bible didn't sign that contract. You did. And don't talk to me about blood. Blood is why I didn't call the police. Blood is why you are standing on a yacht instead of in a jail cell. That is the only mercy you are going to get. My mother was sobbing into her hands, rocking back and forth. "We have nothing," she moaned. "We have absolutely nothing. We are destitute." "You have a house," I reminded her. "You have your pension. You have your car. You just don't have the windfall you were counting on to fund your vanity." Tiffany, who had been staring at the paper in shock, suddenly looked up. Her eyes were hard, and the panic had been replaced by a cold, survivalist instinct. She turned to Brandon. "You idiot," she hissed. "You told me she would pay. You told me she was soft. You said she was desperate for Daddy's approval." "I thought she was," Brandon pleaded. "You signed the waiver," Tiffany screamed at him, shoving his shoulder. "You signed away your inheritance. You signed away everything for nothing. You useless, incompetent loser. I should have left you 6 months ago." "Tiffany, please," Brandon begged, reaching for her arm. "Don't touch me." She recoiled. She turned to me, her face shifting instantly into a mask of pleading. "Harper, listen. I didn't know. I didn't know about the forgery. I didn't know about the debt being that bad. He lied to me too. You have to believe me. This is all him. Can't we work something out? I am a victim here too." I looked at her with pure disgust. "You are not a victim. Tiffany, you are an accessory. I saw the texts. I know you were planning to divorce him the moment the money hit the account. You are just angry that the getaway car has a flat tire." "That is a lie," she shrieked, but her face flushed red. Brandon looked at his wife, the realization dawning on him. You were going to leave me?" "Of course I was," she spat. "Look at you. You are a failure." Brandon's face contorted. The humiliation, the loss of the money, the betrayal by his wife, the domination by his sister, it all coalesced into a blinding rage. He let out a guttural roar and lunged across the table at me. "I will kill you," he screamed, reaching for my throat. "You witch! Give me my money!" He never made it. Before he could even clear the centerpiece, 2 large hands clamped onto his shoulders. The head of security, who had been standing silently by the stairwell, slammed Brandon back into his chair with enough force to rattle the silverware. "Sit down," the guard growled, keeping a heavy hand on Brandon's chest. Brandon struggled for a second, then went limp, collapsing into breathless sobs. My father looked at the guard, then at me, realizing for the first time just how much physical danger they were in. They were not in control. They were guests on a fortress. I didn't flinch. I hadn't moved a muscle when he lunged. I just watched him, calm and impassive. "Get him a glass of water," I told the guard. "We are not finished." "What else could there possibly be?" my father asked, his voice defeated, hollow. "You have taken the house. You have taken the inheritance. You have humiliated us. What more do you want? Harper? Blood?" "I don't want blood," I said, smoothing the lapel of my blazer. "I want clarity. You see, the money was the easy part. The math is simple, but there is one more thing we need to discuss. One more lie that needs to be corrected." I walked over to the sideboard and picked up a small remote control. "You came here claiming you missed me," I said, turning back to them. "You claimed the silence of the last 5 years was just a drifting apart. You claimed you loved me." I pointed the remote at the screen. "Let's see if that is true," I said. "Because while my investigators were looking into your finances, they found something else. Something you probably thought was deleted forever." I pressed the button. The screen flickered. "This," I said, "is the final accounting." The audio file I selected was short, clear, and devastating. It was a voice note Tiffany had sent to her sister just 20 minutes ago, recorded while she was supposedly in the bathroom fixing her makeup. The speakers on the bulkhead crackled, and then Tiffany's voice filled the open air of the deck, loud and unmistakable. "Girl, I am shaking. The idiot is actually going to sign the waiver. He thinks his sister is bailing him out. But as soon as that cash hits the joint account, I am moving it to the offshore shell we talked about. I have the transfer queued up on my phone. I am going to file the papers tomorrow and leave him with the debt. I can't wait to see his face when he realizes he is broke and single in the same week." The recording ended with a sharp click. For 3 seconds. The only sound was the wind snapping the flag at the stern. Brandon turned to his wife slowly. His face was no longer red with anger. It was slack, drained of all blood. He looked like a man who had been shot in the gut and was just realizing he was bleeding. "Tiffany?" he whispered. Tiffany stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward. "That is fake," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "That is AI. You can do anything with computers now. She is trying to frame me because she hates me. Brandon, baby, you know I wouldn't do that. It is a deepfake." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply tapped the tablet again. The screen changed to a metadata log. "That file was created at 6:42 this morning," I said, my voice clinical. "The geolocation tag is right here. The Obsidian. Guest stateroom 2, starboard head. Unless an artificial intelligence broke into your bathroom and recorded this while you were brushing your teeth. That is you. Tiffany." I swiped the screen again. "And here's the screen capture of the transfer you have queued on your phone. $200,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands under the name TC Holdings. TC, Tiffany Chapman. You weren't even creative with the acronym." Brandon made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was a horrible, broken noise. "You called me an idiot," he said, staring at her. "In the recording, you called me an idiot. Because you are one," Tiffany exploded. Dropping the act completely, her face twisted into a sneer. "Look at you. You are a 30-year-old man who still needs his mommy and daddy to co-sign his loans. You have never made a dime on your own. I stuck around for 5 years waiting for the big payout you promised, and all I got was debt and a leased BMW. I earned that money. Brandon, I put up with you." "You put up with him?" my mother gasped, clutching her pearls. "After we welcomed you? After we treated you like a daughter?" "You treated me like a broodmare you hoped would give you grandkids," Tiffany spat back. "And you are just as broke as he is now. I am done. I am leaving." She turned to grab her purse, but I cleared my throat. It was a soft sound, but it stopped her cold. "You are leaving," I agreed. "But you are leaving empty-handed, and you are leaving on foot." "I am taking the car," she snapped. "The car is leased in Brandon's name," I said. "And since Brandon has just defaulted on his primary obligations, and I hold the power of attorney over the collateralized assets, the car stays. You can call an Uber at the gate if you have a credit card that isn't maxed out. That is..." Tiffany looked at me with pure venom. "You think you have won, don't you? You think because you have money you are better than us?" "I don't think I am better," I said. "I think I am solvent. Goodbye. Tiffany." I nodded to the security chief. He stepped forward, his presence massive and silent. Tiffany looked at him, then at Brandon, who had his head in his hands. She scoffed, grabbed her fake designer bag, and marched toward the gangway without looking back. "Get her off my dock," I told the guard. "If she returns, arrest her for trespassing." When she was gone, the silence that settled over the table was heavy, suffocating. My parents sat frozen, caught between the wreckage of their son's marriage and the crater of their own financial ruin. "She was a devil," my father muttered, trying to find a villain he could fight. "She twisted him, Brandon, son. She made you do it. We know that. She confused you." "Stop," I said. My father looked up, startled by the sharpness of my tone. "Stop rewriting history," I said. "Tiffany didn't forge your signatures. Dad, Brandon did. I pulled up the image of the deed of trust again. I zoomed in on the signatures until they were 3 feet tall on the screen. "Look at them," I commanded. "Really look at them. That is not confusion. That is practice. That is hours of tracing your handwriting until he got it right enough to fool a clerk in New Jersey. Tiffany might have been greedy, but your golden boy is a criminal." "He didn't mean to hurt us," my mother pleaded, her voice thin and wavering. "He was desperate." "He stole your house," I said, "and he did it 18 months ago. He has been lying to your face every Sunday dinner for a year and a half. He let you sleep in a house that didn't belong to you anymore. If I hadn't bought this note today, the sheriff would be throwing your furniture on the lawn next week." "But you fixed it," my father said, his voice gaining a little strength, trying to find a handhold on the cliff. "You bought the house, so it stays in the family. We are safe." "You are not safe," I corrected him. "You are tenants." I picked up the sale agreement they had signed so eagerly just 20 minutes ago. "You didn't read the terms," I said. "You were so obsessed with the idea that I should give my assets to the man of the family that you didn't realize what you were doing. You wanted to force me to transfer power to Brandon? Instead, you voluntarily signed the deed over to me. I am now the sole owner of 1402 Maplewood Drive. You live there because I allow it. You sleep there because I permit it." My mother's face went white. She looked around the yacht, finally understanding the scale of the trap. "But what if you change your mind?" she whispered. "What if you get angry? Where do we go? Where do we live?" I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had changed the locks on my childhood bedroom the day after I graduated college because I refused to marry the son of her church friend. I looked at the woman who hadn't called me when I was hospitalized with pneumonia 3 years ago, even though Aunt Martha had told her. "Where do you live?" I repeated. I leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. "You have had 5 years to ask me where I lived," I said softly. "You have had 1,825 days to wonder if I had a roof over my head. You didn't care where I was when I was sleeping in my car because I couldn't afford rent. You didn't care where I was when I was building this company from nothing. You only care about shelter now that the storm is hitting you." "That is different," my father stammered. "We are your parents." "And I was your child," I said. "The contract is signed. You have a lease. As long as you follow the rules, my rules, you have a home, but never forget who holds the keys." Brandon lifted his head. His eyes were red, rimmed with dark circles. He looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see arrogance. I saw fear. "What about me?" he croaked. "Tiffany is gone. The money is gone. What happens to me?" "You have a choice," I said. "I have the confession of judgment you signed. I have the proof of the forgery. I can file these with the district attorney this afternoon, and you will go to prison for fraud." Brandon flinched as if I had hit him. "Or?" he asked. "Or you get a job," I said. "A real job, not an investment opportunity, not a scheme. You start at the bottom, you work, and every month, you pay me 20% of your check to reimburse the risk premium I paid today." "I can't work a regular job," Brandon whined. "I have a bad back. I have anxiety." "Then you have a prison sentence," I said simply. "Pick one." He slumped in his chair. He knew it wasn't a bluff. He looked at our parents for help, but they were staring at the table, unable to meet his gaze. The illusion of the perfect family had been shattered, not by me, but by the truth I had forced them to look at. I stood up straight, smoothing the front of my white suit. The sun was fully up now, harsh and bright, leaving no shadows for them to hide in. "This is cruel," my mother wept. "You are doing this to punish us. This is revenge." I looked at her, then at the settlement statement, then at the signed deed. "No, Mother," I said, my voice as calm as the dead water in the harbor. "Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This is just math." I picked up the remote and turned off the screen. "This isn't revenge," I said. "This is a settlement. The sun was high now, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows across the deck of the Obsidian. The morning mist had burned off, leaving nowhere to hide. My family sat in the wreckage of their expectations. They had arrived expecting a celebration, a reunion, and a windfall. They were leaving as tenants in a home they no longer owned, tethered to a daughter they had tried to exploit. Tiffany was gone, escorted off the property by security. Her absence left a void that Brandon seemed unable to fill. He sat slumped in his chair, staring at his hands, stripped of the bravado that usually armored him. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was a 32-year-old man with a felony-level confession in his sister's safe and a bankruptcy looming over his head. "The lease on your car is also in default," I said, breaking the silence. I didn't say it with malice. I said it as a fact. I saw the notices in the background of the digital file Elias pulled. "They are going to repossess it, Brandon, probably today or tomorrow." "Can you?" Brandon started, then stopped. He looked at me, his eyes wet and red. "Can you stop them?" "I could," I said. "I could write a check for the $4,000 you are behind, but I won't." "Why?" my mother cried out, her voice cracking. "You just spent over $1 million on the house. What is $4,000 more to keep your brother mobile?" "Because the house secures my parents," I replied. "The car secures nothing but Brandon's ego. If he wants to drive, he can take the bus, or he can get a job and buy a used Honda. That is not my problem." My father stood up slowly. He looked older than he had when he walked up the gangway. The pompous air was gone, replaced by a gray, shaken fragility. "Harper," he said, his voice raspy. "Can we speak? Just us? Without the lawyers, without the security guards. Please, just your mother and me." I signaled to the security chief to step back to the helm station, out of earshot but within eyesight. "Go ahead," I said. My parents walked around the table to stand in front of me. My mother reached out to touch my arm, but I didn't move toward her, and she let her hand drop. "We didn't know it was this bad," my mother whispered. "We truly didn't know he had done that to the deed. You have to believe us. Harper, we would never have tried to hurt you if we knew." "You wouldn't have tried to hurt me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You sat there for an hour trying to guilt me into giving you cash. You told me I was unnatural for having money. You tried to coerce me into signing over my assets to Brandon because he is a man. You were perfectly happy to hurt me. Mom, you just didn't know I was holding a shield." "We were scared," my father insisted. "We were scared of losing the house. We thought you were strong enough to take the hit. You have so much—" "Harper, we just thought you could share the burden." "Share the burden," I repeated. The phrase tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked out at the Miami skyline, shimmering in the heat. "Do you remember 5 years ago?" I asked. "The week I stopped calling?" "You were busy," my mother said quickly. "You had just moved to the city. We thought you were just working hard." "No," I said. "I wasn't working. I was in the hospital." They froze. "I had an ovarian cyst rupture," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tears they probably expected. "I was alone in a studio apartment. I didn't have health insurance yet because my contract hadn't started. I was in agony. I called you. Mom, I called the house line 3 times. I called your cell phone twice." My mother's face went pale. She blinked, searching her memory. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember seeing the missed calls. But it was Brandon's engagement party, the big one at the country club. We were greeting guests. I thought you were calling to say congratulations." "I left a voicemail," I said. "I said I was scared. I said I was in pain. I asked you to come. I didn't listen to it until the next day." She stammered. "And by then, I had driven myself to the emergency room." I finished. "I had emergency surgery alone. I woke up alone, and when I called you the next day to tell you I needed help with the deductible, $500, that was all I needed. You told me you couldn't help because you had just put down the deposit on Brandon's wedding venue. The silence on the deck was absolute. Even the seagulls seemed to stop screaming. That was the moment, I said. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a fight. It was a choice. You chose his party over my surgery. You chose his happiness over my survival. So don't stand here and tell me about family burdens. I carried my burden alone. Now you can carry yours. My father looked down at his shoes. He couldn't look at me. The moral high ground he had tried to claim all morning had crumbled into dust. "We are sorry," he mumbled. "Harper, we are so sorry." "I don't want your apology," I said. "Apologies are just words. They don't pay the rent. They don't fix the past." "Then what do you want?" my mother asked, weeping openly now. "Do you want us to beg? We are begging. Please, don't hate us." "I don't hate you," I said. "Hate takes energy. I don't have energy for you anymore. I have indifference." I walked back to the table and picked up the file folder containing the lease agreement. "Here is the reality," I said, handing the folder to my father. "You go back to the house. You live there. I will pay the property taxes and the home insurance because the house is my asset and I protect my assets. But you pay the utilities. You pay for your own food. You pay for your own gas. You live on your pension and Social Security." "And Brandon?" my father asked, clutching the folder like a lifeline. "If Brandon lives there, he pays rent," I said. "To me, market rate for a room rental in that zip code is $800 a month. If he doesn't pay, I evict him. If he causes trouble, I file the confession of judgment and he goes to jail. He is not my project anymore. He is a tenant on probation." "But that is a hard life," my mother said softly. "We used to have expectations." "You have a paid-off roof over your head and food on the table," I said. "That is more than I had 5 years ago. That is a good life. It is just a simple life. You wanted me to save you from ruin. I did. I didn't say I would save you from reality." "She is right," the voice came from behind me. It was Aunt Martha. I had almost forgotten she was there. She had been sitting quietly in the corner of the lounge area the entire time, watching, listening. Now she stood up, her face flushed with a mix of anger and sorrow. "Martha," my father warned, "this is a family matter." "I am family," Martha snapped. Walking over to stand beside me, she looked at her brother and sister-in-law with a level of disappointment that seemed to shrink them. "I have watched you two for 30 years. I watched you spoil that boy until he was rotten. And I watched you ignore this girl because she didn't need you to tie her shoes." She put a hand on my shoulder. It was warm. It was the first human touch I had felt all day that didn't feel like a transaction. "You are looking at her like she is a stranger," Martha said to them. "But she is exactly who you made her. You taught her that love is conditional. You taught her that money is the only language you speak. Well, congratulations. She learned the language better than you did." "Martha, please," my mother sobbed. "You don't love her," Martha said, her voice shaking but loud. "You love what she has. You love the boat. You love the bailout. You love the idea of a rich daughter, but you don't love her. If she had told you she was working at a diner today, you would have walked right back off this boat and never called her again." My parents didn't answer. They couldn't. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. "Go home," I said softly. "The car is waiting at the gate to take you back. Enjoy the house. It is a nice house." My father looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a dull, hollow defeat. He took my mother's arm. Brandon stood up, wiping his nose with his sleeve, looking like a ghost. They turned and walked toward the gangway. They didn't look back. They didn't wave. They just walked away. 3 smaller figures against the backdrop of the massive yachts and the glittering water. Aunt Martha squeezed my shoulder. "I am proud of you," she whispered, "but I'm also sorry. No child should have to be their parent's banker." "I am not their banker, Martha," I said, watching them disappear past the security gate. I am just the landlord. I am going to go, Martha said. I think you need a minute. Call me next week. Just to talk? No business. I will, I promised. She left, and I was finally alone. I walked to the railing and looked down at the dark water. The yacht was silent. The staff was invisible. The papers were signed. The deal was closed. I had won. I had saved the family home. I had stopped the fraud. I had neutralized the threat. I had established boundaries that could never be crossed again. By every metric of my profession. This was a successful restructuring. But as I looked at the reflection of the city in the water, I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. I touched the Patek Philippe on my wrist. It ticked steadily, counting seconds that I would never get back. I had turned my family into a transaction to survive them. I had used their greed as a weapon and their fear as leverage. I had become the cold, unyielding force they accused me of being, because it was the only way to protect myself from their warmth, which burned. I looked at my reflection in the glass of the salon door. My suit was white, pristine, spotless. My face was calm. Am I becoming them? I asked the silence. The silence didn't answer. It just billed me for the time. 3 days later, I convened the final meeting. I did not host it on the yacht. I did not invite them to my office. I rented a sterile, windowless conference room in a neutral law firm downtown. I wanted no scenery, no distractions, and absolutely no emotional anchors. My parents sat on one side of the table. I sat on the other. Between us lay a single set of keys and a thick binder of legal stipulations. Brandon was not present. I had banned him from the premises. His presence was a variable I was no longer willing to calculate. This is the end of the negotiation, I said, sliding the binder across the polished wood. Inside is the lease agreement for the house at 1402 Maplewood Drive. It grants you residency for the remainder of your natural lives. Provided you adhere to the maintenance clauses, you pay the utilities, you pay for your own groceries, I pay the property taxes, and the major structural insurance. That is the extent of my contribution. My father stared at the binder. He looked smaller than he had on the boat. The bluster was gone, replaced by a sagging gray defeat. He didn't reach for the keys immediately. Harper, he said, his voice raspy. We are your parents. You can't reduce 50 years of family history to a landlord-tenant agreement. We are your flesh and blood. I folded my hands on the table. I am glad you brought that up, I said, because for the last week, you have used flesh and blood as a weapon. You used it to try and pick the lock of my bank account. You used it to demand things you did not earn. Let me be clear. Father, blood is biology. It is a genetic accident. It is not a credit card. And it is certainly not a license to trespass on my peace of mind. I pointed to the keys. Those keys open the door to a house you no longer own. If you want them, pick them up. If you don't, I will put the house on the market this afternoon. My mother reached out and covered my father's hand. Stopping him from arguing, she looked tired. Her eyes were red-rimmed, stripped of the judgment that had defined her gaze for my entire life. We will take them, she said softly. She looked at me, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw her actually look at me, not at my blazer, not at my watch, but at my face. Harper, I know we can't fix this. I know we broke it. I am sorry. I am sorry we didn't come to the hospital. I am sorry we chose him. It was the apology I had fantasized about for half a decade. I used to imagine that hearing those words would make me cry, or make me run into her arms, but as I sat there, I felt steady. I realized that my healing did not depend on her repentance. I didn't need her to be sorry for me to be whole. I accept your apology, I said. But acceptance is not an invitation. The door is closed. Mom, you have a house. You have a life. But you don't have me. Not in the way you want. I stood up. The utilities have been transferred to your name as of this morning. The stipend for Brandon, which is strictly limited to 3 months of food vouchers, not cash, is detailed in Addendum B. If he contacts me, the vouchers stop. If he comes to my office, the vouchers stop. If he posts about me on social media, the vouchers stop. Do we understand each other? We understand, my mother whispered. And Tiffany? My father asked, looking up. Tiffany filed for divorce yesterday, I said. She realized there was no trust fund to raid. She is gone. Brandon is on his own. For the first time in his life, he is going to have to learn how to survive without a safety net. If you try to be that net, you will fall with him. I advise you to let him learn. I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for a goodbye. The sound of the heavy door clicking shut behind me was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. An hour later, I was back on the Obsidian. The engines were already idling. A low, powerful rumble that vibrated through the deck. Aunt Martha was sitting on the aft lounge, wearing a sun hat and reading a paperback novel. She looked up and smiled as I boarded. Done? She asked. Done, I said. How do you feel? Light, I replied. I feel incredibly light. I walked to the helm station. I had made one final decision that morning. I wasn't just kicking them out of my life. I was removing myself from their map. I had sold my spot at the marina. I had instructed my broker to liquidate my local holdings and transfer everything to a trust based in Zurich. I was moving the yacht and my business headquarters to the Mediterranean. If they wanted to find me, they would need a passport and a plane ticket they couldn't afford. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was Brandon. He had called 14 times in the last hour. He had sent 30 text messages, alternating between begging for money, blaming me for Tiffany leaving him, and threatening to go to the press. I looked at the screen. A younger version of me would have answered. A younger version of me would have tried to explain, to justify, to save him one last time. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the CEO of my own existence. I didn't throw the phone into the ocean. That is what people do in movies. It is dramatic, but it is wasteful. Instead, I simply held down the power button. I watched the screen go black. Then I walked over to the drawer where the crew kept the spare electronics, dropped the phone inside, and locked it. I would get a new number in Italy. Cast off, I told the captain. The ropes were thrown. The gap between the yacht and the dock widened. 1 foot, then 5 feet, then 20. I watched the city of Miami retreat. Somewhere in that sprawl of concrete and palm trees was a house on Maplewood Drive where 2 elderly people were learning to live within their means. Somewhere there was a 32-year-old man realizing that the world does not owe him a living. They were no longer my characters to write. They were just part of the backstory. I walked to the stern and leaned against the railing, watching the wake of the boat churn the water into white foam. Aunt Martha came and stood beside me, handing me a glass of iced tea. You know, she said, looking back at the shrinking skyline, they are going to tell everyone you abandoned them. They are going to play the victim. Let them, I said, taking a sip. I don't need to be the hero in their story. Martha, I just need to be the protagonist in mine. I looked at the horizon. Where the blue of the sky met the blue of the ocean, it was wide open. It was empty. It was free. I had learned the hardest lesson a person can learn. Family isn't about whose DNA you carry. It isn't about history or obligation. Family is behavior. Family is showing up. Family is the people who respect your boundaries, not the ones who bulldoze them. I turned my back on the shore and faced the open sea. Full speed ahead, I whispered. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed Harper's journey, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear this story.